Today's guest is Tamar Maritz, who is the VP of Business Development for BDS Analytics. So I think our audience would probably want to know a little bit about you and a little bit about BDS Analytics. So take it away, wherever you'd like to start.
Right on. So my name's Tamar Maritz. I am, as you mentioned, the VP of Biz Dev for BDS Analytics. For those who aren't familiar with us, we are a full-fledged market research firm dedicated to the global cannabinoid market. So we track a variety of sources of data, including retail sales data, as well as consumer behaviors and attitudes towards cannabis, right? So we like to understand the full scale suite of insights around what's happening out there from a product evolution perspective, as well as a consumer evolution perspective, right? Understanding how both products and consumers are evolving over time to accommodate for this new world order. And my background is in this exact type of market research. So I came from a company called the NPD Group, which in fact a number of our founding team came from, and they brought me on about a year into the company's launch to launch the California market for them. And I was in my past life at NPD, which specializes in retail sales tracking and consumer research in other industries such as tech, sports, fashion, a very similar business model to ours, but in those worlds. I was in their consumer tech division, and I was their headphone analyst, stereo headphones. So working with clients such as Beats and Bose and Skullcandy, that's what I did before. Before then, I was in the sciences world. I did my undergrad at UCSD, background in biochemistry, worked in the lab a little bit. Went from there into sales and got my MBA, and then found myself landing at BDS Analytics 3 years ago.
Fantastic. Now, is consumer research on the cannabis side, is that something new, or has this been going on for some time?
Depends what you mean by some time. We're 4 years old, and so I think we were the first retail sales tracking to come to market. I don't think that we were the first. I believe that there were some folks out there doing maybe not syndicated and ongoing research, but occasional consumer surveys around cannabis and cannabis consumption. So I don't think that we were the first to do that. But the first to come in and aggregate retail sales data on a syndicated basis, right? Clean it, code it into a dictionary, and publish that data right on a consistent basis. I think that we were the first to provide that service for the industry.
And do you guys do tracking with both the recreational side and the medicinal side, or do you focus on one?
Yep, no, both. So we're tracking obviously anything that sells in the consumer or in the dispensary channel, right? We track any product that sells, and both whether it's adult or med, right? We are obviously. We're currently launched in 6 states, and as we're looking to expand nationally, we are obviously there's a lot of states coming online in various stages. We're prioritizing adult use states, right? As obviously there's going to be a lot more of a brand consumer product play in those states, right, than there will be in medical only markets, and so. We're obviously focused on those in terms of prioritizing launching new markets, but still obviously not ignoring especially major medical markets such as Michigan and Maryland, right? Pennsylvania. I mean, these are all big medical market, and Florida. So all of those are on our roadmap, right, to launch. In addition, of course, to Massachusetts and Illinois, which is going to be an up and coming big rec market, right?
Is there specific tracking software that the dispensaries use in order to report their data?
It varies, right? I mean, this is where I think things get a little bit interesting in this space, right? If you think about traditional retail, right, outside of the cannabis industry, there's a select few major point of sale or ERP solutions that service most major industries, right? If you think about, a lot of the small retail, mom and pop retail shops that you're going to, they're using Square, they're using Revel, they're using ShopKeep, but you'd be hard pressed to name a variety of others, right? In this industry, We are currently collecting data from 35 different point of sale systems. That's point of sale only, right? So I'm not even accounting for manufacturing, cultivation, distribution, software, right? Further up the, ERP chain, right? And so in this industry, right, it's really interesting because what happened was, similar to how a company that did, research such as ours didn't exist 5 years ago. There were not many point of sale solutions 5 years ago, right? Probably just a select few, and they were just starting out. And so you ended up in a situation where, all of a sudden, all of these markets are coming online, right? They're legalizing. They need to integrate to the state seed to sale tracking system, and they need some sort of mechanism to do so. And so you've got all of a sudden a big rush, right? Understanding that this need is coming, that auditing is coming, that legalization is coming. Years ago, you had this rush of point of sale solutions come to market, right, to try to address that hole, that void in the market, right? Because obviously, there was a period of time where a lot of dispensaries were on Revel, they were on Shopkeep, right? They were on these more traditional or outside of cannabis point of sale solutions, but those guys aren't necessarily, due to the federally illegal status of cannabis, either they're not necessarily willingly participating, right? Or and especially when it comes to having to integrate with metric or some sort of seed to sell tracking system or track and trace system, right? They're not going to prioritize that, right? So that's why everyone had to move off in California and in other states. They had to move on to a metric approved or whatever seed to sale system or tracking system that state is using, a system that integrates with that track and trace module, right? So that they don't have to upload that information on their own, right? On a monthly or daily basis. And so, you saw flooded, like a significant amount of players come to market. The market is not big enough. The point of sale market is not big enough to support 35 different point of sale systems nationally. And so we're going to see, just like we see in, on the brand side, on the plant touching side, right, we're going to see a mass consolidation, I think, and major, whether that's folks merging or acquiring each other within the space, right, endemic folks buying each other or merging, or once the federal switch happens, right, the Safe Banking Act has passed the House, right, it's only a matter of time before it passes the Senate and gets signed. And when that happens, right, that's, in my opinion, effectively soft legalization, right? It sort of gives the cue to the banks, like, you're good, right? And once the bank cue, what does that mean for, more institutional capital, right? Like, if everyone else is less conservative than the banks, then why would they not come in, right? So as soon as that happens, and, that includes, right, Shopkeep and Revel, and as I mentioned before, half the dispensaries in San Francisco were using Revel before they were forced to migrate onto a solution that integrates with Metric, right? So what to prevent those guys from hopping back over to Revel? Or better yet, at that point, right, why wouldn't Revel just acquire one of the point of sale systems, right?
So it looks like there's going to be a lot of changes and flux that's happening as it's happening all over the industry, right? So market research will follow suit. Well, we talked about a lot of, obviously, the dynamics of gathering the data and how you basically process it. Tell us about some of the insights that you have gathered through this process and how you've seen the market evolve.
Oh, that is a fun question. There are many avenues in which I could answer that question. For starters, when I started launching California, right, it was before adult use voted yes, before we voted yes on adult use, right? And it was, there were still dispensaries that were burning their receipts at the time, right? So, I spending, a week up north, a week up south, essentially begging dispensaries to share their sales data back before we voted yes on adult use was when many, they still are sketched out, right? Some still are sketched out with sharing their data, but back then especially since we were kind of an unknown at the time, that was interesting. Now that, we have a name in the market, and, it's less likely, that folks are sketched out in terms of data sharing. It's been easier. However, that's still, there is still that lingering mentality in the space, right? You still have a lot of old school operators, a lot of mom and pop operators, especially on the retail side, right? And why? Well, retailers definitely hold a lot, if not most, of the power in the supply chain. Specifically, it is the budtenders and the buyers that hold power in the supply chain, right? And also, it's a lot harder to push retailers out on scale, right? So if you think further up the supply chain, right, cultivation, manufacturing, you can push if you're well capitalized enough and have good enough distribution, you can bring, and you can manufacture at a loss, right? Or at least take some hits to get your product out there. Well, you could dominate the supply chain, right? Or at least dominate the shelf space. You could push other folks out, right? Just by having that sheer scale, right? And being able to compete on price. And so you are seeing a lot of what we're calling the, we not necessarily BDS Analytics, but the industry is calling the extinctions, right, of the smaller operators. As you're seeing regulatory changes take effect, and as you're seeing market dynamics shift, right? So if you think about January 1st of 2018 in California, either you did or did not have a license at the time. Either you were or not able to acquire a license. If you did not, you were not participating in the retail and the legal market, right? And so you saw a wave of extinction, we call it, right? At that point in time, where a lot of small operators just couldn't cut it in the New World Order, couldn't make it into, they couldn't meet those startup costs, right? The barriers to entry that it took to compete in the legal market. You saw similar wave of extinction in July of 2018 when the new testing regulations and packaging restrictions took effect, right? We saw a significant number of brands fall out of the market. Some recovered, some didn't. And now we're in this third long wave of extinction, right? So while those two first waves were acute, right? They were sort of single variable driven and acute, right? This third wave, right, is a significantly longer, more involved multivariable wave, right? You have many things at play, and that includes consolidation, right? It includes a lot of this new external capital coming in, right? Has been happening. I mean, Canada money coming in a year ago has obviously made a significant impact on a lot of the market dynamics and brand landscape in California as they're slowly but surely acquiring, right, in one way or another. And of course, you have a lot of, if you've been paying attention in the media the last few weeks, a lot of the dirt or undercurrent news in the industry has started to surface, right? I'm not going to name any names, but there have been a significant amount of articles and news releases that have come up exposing, right, a lot of the more unsavory behavior that has been taking place in the industry over the last few years. And because there has been really limited visibility into what's taking place, it's been easy to dupe and fool a lot of the external capital that's been coming in, right? And that is over time becoming less and less possible to hide, right? And so I think that, you're going to see a continued consolidation. And now, which brings me in, I forgot what the point was that I started with earlier, but for whatever reason, I wanted to talk about the third wave of extinction, which, what were you, remind me what the question was? Oh, how we've seen, exactly. So what's happening with this third wave, right, is also a mass consolidation, right, as you're getting a lot of the folks further up the supply chain, as they're getting pushed out, right, with, more scale, more capital, more experience coming in, right? A lot of these mom and pop original small operators, right, getting pushed out. And that's least likely to happen at retail, right? So bringing it back full to the retailer, right? Why we're seeing sort of the strongest, what's the word I'm looking for? The strongest sort of holding off, right? The ones that are sort of the last band of mom and pops that are getting pushed out. Now, that isn't to say that you don't have some survivors still further up the supply chain, right? But with the retail outlet, there's only so much you can scale it, right? There's only a certain capacity that you can meet, a certain amount that you could do per year, right? Obviously, you can always work on cost efficiencies and bringing prices down, but there's also a limit to that, right?
Right.
And so you're seeing still a lot of the mom and pops holding firm at retail, and especially since they still have a lot of the buying and bargaining power, right? And so that I think you're going to start to see. I'm at least right now seeing that evolve quickly, right? So the mass retail consolidations I'm saying take place right now. And I think it's only going to get expedited with the passing of safe banking.
So you think that the mom and pops will more quickly become extinct with the passage of the safe bank?
Yeah, and let's like be careful with the word extinct, right? Because I don't think that it's an extinction per se. You'll still have survivors, right? On the supply side, you're always gonna have. I mean, you'll have some mom and pops that are able to convert and make it into the new world order, right?
Right.
Either through trips or raising savvy capital or whatever it is that they do. But whatever approach they need to take, they obviously will have to take some approach, right?
Right.
Like whenever I get asked what can a small operator do in this space right now, I unfortunately have to dramatize it with the response, insert strong verb here or die, right? Because that's the truth. I mean, either you got to make some drastic move, either merge or die, raise or die, sell or die, but you got to do something because, in some way, adapt or die, the multi-billion-dollar CPG and alcohol companies. I mean, it's already happened with alcohol, right? But with some alcohol companies, right, and a lot of others on the back burner, or at least being more quiet about it. But with your traditional CPG companies, right, and a lot of others in the tobacco, et cetera, there's just billions and billions more waiting to come in, just waiting for that federal okay, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that there is a lot of industries that cannabis would fit very well into: big ag, tobacco, pharma.
Exactly.
So yeah, there's a lot of potential buyers that would be aching to acquire the right assets.
Yeah.
Now, in the past year, a lot of the publicly traded cannabis stocks have taken a beating. What is your advice, or what are the trends that you're seeing based on the analytics that you see for the average mom and pop cannabis investor?
Well, I mean, so when we're talking about cannabis stocks, right, publicly traded cannabis entities, we have to be careful about where and when, right? So when we look to, I mean, a lot of that publicly traded, activity is happening in Canada, right, on the
Correct.
in the Canadian exchanges, and a lot of that, I mean, initially at least, when these Canadian companies were listing, that was before a lot of them had U.S. operations, right, of any kind, and they were setting valuations that, I mean, I think that I have to be careful here. This is obviously an opinion. This isn't any. We don't track any investment data, right? There's other companies that do that, but we can definitely see, obviously, how much brands are performing. How one brand can do, how much volume a brand can do in a particular category across various state markets, right? So different types of markets in different phases of their legalization. Some med only, some adult only, right? Or rather, adult and med. Now, given my knowledge of those volumes, right, and the size of the Canadian market. And I'm speaking here just to Canada, right? It's not my opinion alone that a lot of those valuations were significantly inflated, right? I don't think that that's like a shocking thing to say in this space right now, but so it's not surprising to see with all the reality setting in, right? Like I said, it's happening on the ground level in California too, right? A lot of the dirt, a lot of the smoke and mirrors the smoke is clearing and the mirrors are starting to show, right? And so I think that happened also. Maybe not, I think using the term smoke and mirrors is a little harsh, because in a lot of instances, sure, it was smoke and mirrors, right? You had a lot of companies that were trying to get away with inflating the valuations, taking the pump and dump approach, right? And it worked for some, but for a lot of folks, I don't think it was. I don't think it was so intentional, right? I think that they genuinely thought they'd be able to do those volumes. I think there was a lot of optimism,
right?
And Canada was, I think, very optimistic about a lot of things, right? Like they had first mover advantage.
Absolutely.
they were able to publicly list, which opened the door for a lot of external investment, right? External capital that wanted to be put into the industry. I think that they had a lot of thoughts and ambitions on Canada's ability to grow cheap, decent product that they would be able to supply to global markets. While I love the Canadian operators and they have a good heart, right? In general, I mean, they that's a blanket statement. I don't necessarily love the Canadian operators.
Sure, I got you.
But while I have nothing, this is nothing personal, right? Canada's a frozen tundra, right? Like this is, it's the Great White North, right? I mean, if you're talking about like where an ideal climate is to grow cannabis, it's not Canada, right? Mm-hmm. And so just being able to provide product, right? Good, and it's not like California and Oregon are at a shortage, right? We have a healthy amount in the illicit market that's moving out of state, right? Mm-hmm. And this is, you're talking about, these are states that have been growing cannabis for decades, right? The best cannabis in the world.
Absolutely, yeah. I have lots of experience with genetics too, right?
And lots of experience. And so it's really, really hard to compete with that. And so where I see things evolving, right? I mean, this, the stock price is coming down as the bubble bursting, right?
Yeah.
And it's, it's funny because I don't think people are talking about it as the bubble is bursting right now, but it is.
Right.
And you're seeing that whether it's, it's like, look at in the last few weeks, this I can speak to because it's been in the media, but just today, PAX laid off 65 people, right? Mm-hmm. Last week, Ease, Dionymed, I think that was, a few weeks prior, but who else? Weedmaps, right? And so you're seeing these mass layoffs happening, right? And we're talking about like 30 plus employees, right? 20, 30 employees, 30% of the employees. And that's significant, right? Yeah. Same deal, right? Everybody thinks it's directly tied to the vape crisis. Incidentally, right, I don't think it's directly tied. I think it is a factor, right? It is, again, one of those multivariable factors that led into this third wave of extinction. And I talk about a lot of these factors, and I did a webinar. I don't know if you got a chance to check it out, but for anyone listening, it's on our website. It is from February of this year, and I cover 2018 first year of adult use sales in California. I review the waves of extinction. I go into detail on the brand and market impact. But where I think is interesting is, I talk about my predictions, and this is again my predictions for the third wave of extinction, which was starting to take place when I held the webinar in February, and we're seeing exactly those things take place, right? The one thing I did not predict is the vape thing happening so soon, right? So for the last few years, this is again a personal opinion, not at all a BDS Analytics opinion. We're just tracking the market, and we're definitely seeing an impact in the data. But I definitely thought that, I have never had a positive response to vape, right? I consume a very significant amount of flower. So it's not a measure or a matter of tolerance. In fact, I have had vape manufacturers make me specialized vapes to try to get me high, and it has never worked.
Oh, interesting.
So there's that. I don't respond to vape products at all, but also I've always had a very strong aversion to them when I've consumed them. Like for some reason, I don't know. I've not had a good reaction. And so, but that aside, right? I mean, there's just a lot of question marks around, vape, right? Both in the legal and the illicit market. But, the fact that, right, we don't know if there's just a lot of question marks, right? We don't know if this whole vaping crisis or, vape gate, whatever you want to call it. We don't know if it's a result of, the oil, if it's a result of pesticides that have been concentrated into the oil, if it's the result of the cartridge, right? The actual hardware, the hardware sitting in a hot car for 2 weeks, for 3 months, right? We just don't know. And so, I wasn't surprised to see all this vape, activity kick off. I just didn't think it would happen this soon, to be honest.
It is fairly soon. Yeah, absolutely.
Really soon. And I didn't foresee that thus factoring into this third wave of extinction. So there's a lot happening, right? That's all. It is and isn't tied together, right? I mean, you just have a young market with a lot of volatility, a lot of hiccups in the supply chain, and both plant touching and on the technology side, right, that supports the supply chain, and all of these, kinks, right, that need to be ironed out. This industry is just a few years old, right, in reality, right, as an industry. I mean, the plan's been around forever. The market has existed, right? But as an industry, we've really only been operating for less than a decade, right? As a proper industry.
Yeah.
And so yeah, there's a lot of kinks that need to be worked out. And if you think about just traditional retail, right? Traditional retail has had decades to evolve, right? Not just from again, there's a lot of products that we consumed decades ago that we didn't know were causing us, right, damage, and we iterated, we had, we cleaned it up, and I'm sure the same thing will happen with vapes, right? And for folks that are doing it right, for folks that are, have done the research into the materials used, right, that have done the research into the cutting agents that they use, that we know, right? I mean, vaping has only been around for about a decade, right? If even. So it's hard to anecdotally, or at least look at historical evidence, right? We know we have millennia of evidence of combusting plant matter, whether cannabis or tobacco, right? So I don't know, but I'm sure that, you have folks that are doing it the right way, right? And I know that you are, and that will continue to, innovate their products to make sure that it's only safer and only healthier to consume. However, for those that aren't, right, I mean, that goes back to the extinction, whether it's a capability issue, whether it's, for some, maybe it was malicious, right, or malintent, like they knew they were putting shit into their cartridges, for lack of a better word. But I think that there's a lot of others that didn't think, I don't think anybody was intending to do anything, or isn't. I don't think there's any malintent on many folks, right? Similar to the overvaluations, right? I think there's just a lot of optimism. I think a lot of people thought like this is a lot of people thought it was healthier, or still think
Absolutely,
it is.
Yeah.
And it could still be for products that are clean, right? So again, we just don't know, so. So yeah, I think that, there's just a lot of contributing factors, to this, stage of the market and to this bubble bursting, right? I mean, all of that, all signs lead to or point to the same, outcome, right? And, whether it, and it's all the challenges. So, right, whether it be the manufacturing testing challenge, which is kind of the category vape falls into, right? And of course, the challenges, and also that the vape category falls into, the challenges around illicit activity, right? Taking over this market. Part of that has to do with especially in California, but in a lot of other states as well. That a lot of that has to do with the, I don't want to say over-regulation, right? But maybe not the best regulatory structures put in place to incentivize operators to move into the legal market and consumers to move into the legal market, right? I mean, especially in California, you're looking at double the price at retail in many instances, right, for a gram of flour. Within the legal market versus in the illicit market, right? So where's the incentive for the consumer to go to the legal dispensary, right? Especially when they can't even tell the difference.
Right.
So they go to the dispensary across the street, right? So that's half the price, and they have no idea it's not legal, right? So that you're just dealing with a lot of compounding factors that are all tied together, right? But not at the same time. And yeah, a lot of it has to do with the fact that the industry just needs to iron itself out, right?
Correct.
The traditional retail has had decades to figure itself out.
So what you were saying with the illegal dispensaries, there's currently illegal dispensaries, or are there legal dispensaries that carry some black market product?
No, there's illegal dispensaries. So it's very strict, right? And if the dispensary is already integrated with metric, right?
Mm-hmm.
Product is tracked from seed to sale. And so, dispensaries are only able to purchase from folks that have, in theory, should only be able to purchase from folks that have a distribution license, right? So a dispensary can't purchase directly from the manufacturer unless they themselves have a distribution license, right? And so there are legal restrictions around that prevents people from moving outside of, in the supply chain from just products that are not state licensed from getting onto retailer shelves. However, there is a very strong presence of illicit retailers in the state, right? Especially in LA. We call them whack-a-moles, right? I mean, they get shut down in one way or another. Either their water or their power's cut off, or they're raided and their products taken, right? And then they just pop up open. They pay the fines and pop up open somewhere else. 2 days later, and those products they're usually carrying illicit product. If they're carrying any legal product, well, then that legal manufacturer should be thinking about how their product is getting into that illegal dispensary, right? But the illicit retailers are definitely, they're not there. There's no way for the consumer, right? I mean, they're listing on Weedmaps. Weedmaps has until the end of the year to take them down. I've heard they've been taking. Right. I mean, that was a directive from Governor Newsom, I think in the last few weeks or last month. Weedmaps, I believe, has taken them down. Or has taken some down, or is in the process of taking them down. I'm not sure. I would proof that, right? But yeah, for the end consumer at this point in time, they go onto Weedmaps. There's no way for them to know who's licensed.
Goodness. Wow. I actually thought there was some regulatory activity with Weedmaps, or that they would perhaps collaborate with a market research agency to make sure the data is clean and the dispensaries are vetted.
Well, that's the tricky part, right? I mean, we vet the dispensaries by just going to the BCC, right? Like we don't need necessarily, like neither Weedmaps nor us needs each other to vet dispensaries, right? Like they should be able to also just go to the BCC website and see who's licensed or not, right?
Absolutely,
now, ideally, we'd be able to communicate that to the end consumer, right? And the state tried. They had, I don't know how effective it was, but they did put some money towards a campaign. I think there were billboards, but encouraging, incentivizing consumers to purchase in the legal markets, right? To go onto the BCC's website and proof retail locations. Unfortunately, I don't think that the state's database makes it so easy for what's the word I'm looking for? Just a Joe Schmo consumer,
novice,
right? It's a licensed search system. You have to go through like 7 pages to find it.
Oh my goodness.
And then you can't necessarily just put in the dispensary name, because not every dispensary name is listed in there, right? They might be listed under their corporate name, right? Their business profile name or whatever it is. And so, they're just whatever, their holding company, however it is, their legal name. All right. And that has nothing to necessarily do with the name that's visible to the consumer, right? So they could look it up by address, they could look it up, but is the consumer actually going to make that much of an effort, right? Like, wouldn't it just be easier for them to go to like some website type, that like a Weedmaps, but that only shows legal dispensaries?
Right.
So it's tricky, right? Like, why is the consumer not to, why are they to question that? They have no idea.
Absolutely. I had no idea.
California passed adult use. Everything should be good.
Absolutely. That's so interesting, but that goes to show that the industry is still evolving and there's such a need for us to self-regulate, right? Because we really shouldn't wait for outside agencies to come in and regulate and bring some standards into this industry and community.
Totally. And there are, I like that you said self-regulate, right? Because like one thing I do want to call out is, a lot of the OG operators, a lot of these mom and pops that have kicked this industry off, right? We can't, I feel like sometimes when I talk about these waves of extinction, I talk about it in such a cold way, right? Like, I think, I'm not being sensitive to a lot of these original operators and not giving them the credit they deserve, right? Because the fact of the matter is they built this industry, right? It is because of these original operators, right? That we, and, don't get me wrong, I'm extremely close with some of them. It's not, I know them. I know the challenges they go through. But they built this industry, right? They, while yes, it's tragic to see them die, to see a lot of them go out of business, not make it, have to, whatever it is that they need to do to, they have to sell at a loss. I mean, whatever it is, right? Sell for parts, give up their dream, give up their brand, give up, sell out in quotation marks. If that's what you need to do to survive right now, I am not judging, I think that I have, I and hopefully many of the operators that are coming in, right? I think ideally folks that are able to come in with a lot of capital and a good heart, right? And good investment and, traditional retail experience, right? Folks from CPG, from big alcohol, but that understand that this industry was this universe, this community was here for decades, well before they came around, right? And have respect for that and find the right partner, right? Find that right mom and pop operator, find that right, OG partner to help you build the best. Those are the companies that I see succeeding the most, right? The ones that take advantage of that person that has fought for this plant for so long, understands what it takes to go into producing a high quality plant, right? I think that's also part of the challenge with what happened in Canada is folks thought it was so easy to grow good bud. Like, yeah, sure, let's just get hundreds of thousands of square feet and grow good bud. What's the problem? And it's not that easy, right? I mean, my husband and I home grow and like we struggle with like 6 plants, right? So so it, I mean, they'll survive, but we're working really hard to try to get like nice colas, to try to get good bud, and to, it's not easy. Like
Right,
we
yeah.
put this in lots of smalls. It's
Absolutely.
So,
The issue with pesticides and molds and my goodness, there's so many issues I can really
scale. Exactly. At scale, right? I mean, like that's
decimate, yeah.
Here. And so I think that, I'm seeing a lot of these folks that are able to take advantage, right, of not take advantage is the wrong word, but partner, right? It's giving opportunity. It's giving an escape, right? An out, again, escape's the wrong word. It's giving an opportunity for the small brands to survive, to bring their vision, to bring what they fought for into the New World Order, right? As well as the New World Order that's coming in to learn from them, right? And I see that those that have that partnership, that take advantage of both sets of experience, those are the companies that are succeeding, right? But you need to have a certain level of humility on both sides. And it's hard to find that humility on both sides, right? Because a lot of the original operators think like, well, I know better. These new people have no idea what they're talking about. A lot of the new people are coming in and they're thinking that they know better. These, or OG cannabis operators have no idea what they're talking about. The fact is they're both right and they're both wrong, right? Mm-hmm. Because the original cannabis operators, they get the landscape. They know the gossip. They know what happens in the undercurrents and the relationships, what drives the market, what drives the plant, what drives the growth of the plant, right? How to, even from whether we're talking about just cultivation or whether we're talking about the industry and its nuances, they get that, right? Mm-hmm. Not just cultivation, right? But extraction, manufacturing. I mean, everything that takes place on the, producing good plant matter. And product, right? And then, of course, the people from the outside, right, the New World Order coming in, where they have a lot of experience is in understanding how traditional retail operates, right? I mean, a lot of the OG cannabis operators shouldn't be mistaken in thinking that this industry is going to continue as it has over the last multiple decades, right? It is very quickly, as we were saying, right, we've seen, I mean, it's crazy. Like 3 years I've been doing this. In this space, I feel like that's nothing in the percentage of my life, right? But mm-hmm. I feel like so much has happened in this industry that I have seen and experienced and touched over the last 3 years that it's shocking, right? And it's because it is moving so damn fast, right? And that's not surprising because all of a sudden you've had, like we said, it wasn't exactly an industry. And if you think of each sort of individual state market, right, as it's coming online, whether to medical use or to adult use, right, you had activity always before, right, in one way or another. There was cannabis activity for millennia, right? and it's only in the last, 5+ years been very officialized, right? And so what's interesting and why I bring it up, tying it to, the point I was making before that you brought up of self-regulation. Well, it was regulating itself all those years, right? I mean, in California, we legalized adult use or medical in 1996. There weren't really strict state-driven testing regulations or packaging regulations, right? I mean, some cities had local ordinances, but other than that, there were a significant amount of folks that cared that they were delivering the highest quality medicine to their patients, right? And they were testing their product. There were retailers that double tested the product. Again, this wasn't required, right? But a brand would give the retailer the COA, right, that tested their product. This was when brands were allowed to sell directly to retailers. And then there were some retailers that would double test that. And sometimes, that was happening, right? That's the level of self-regulation was happening. Now, of course, it's mandated, and it's a lot stricter in terms of who is allowed to, or where the testing burden falls in the supply chain. I mean, even now there's a lot of question marks still around, the labs testing standards and how they test differently, and how there aren't necessarily requirements around how a product is tested, dry or wet, right? And so until we have full standardization there around testing, I think it'll be really tricky, because we're still in a challenging spot right now where you're getting different results from different labs, right? But I think that just like everything else in the supply chain, that too will be sorted out, and it is getting sorted out from what I understand, slowly but surely. Labs are also starting to meet these standards, right? So, or at least align on these standards. And so yeah, just like with everything else, we're just going to see things continue to clean up. But, again, like things were and weren't happening before. It's just that now you have all of this, you have this entire underground market that's being officialized, right? It's being stamped with this seal of you are legal now, go. And with that, of course, means an influx of activity from everywhere, right? So, from all sorts of industries coming into cannabis, trying to apply their capital, their experience, their thoughts on where this industry needs to go. And yeah, you're definitely seeing some folks embrace it or find the right partners, right? You're seeing some clash. With the original operators, and it's just been a really interesting dynamic to watch. But while it is sad that we're going to see, right, more folks fall out, more folks that helped to build this industry fall out. It is also part of, this is it. It's almost, and again, I'm saying this as an analyst, and this is when I say I feel cold when I say this, right? But it's almost like the cost of progress, right?
Right.
Like this is what the only conditions under which regulators and special interests agreed to allow, right? I mean, we know how America works, right? We know the power of lobbying dollars. And you had to get the right people bought in, right, for this progress to be allowed to happen. And that is unfortunately at the expense of the small operator. Right. And so with that, I thank the small operators for their sacrifice to this industry. But it is the original. I mean, I don't want to say small operators. I want to say the original, the OGs, right? The mom and pops.
And I mean, to a certain respect, who knows, right? Because craft beer has thrived and survived, and possibly some of those operators can find a niche. And I think that's why it's so important to become integrated within the community and have a tribe that is devoted to your product that you support. Because I think that's how craft beer has survived and, has such a place in people's hearts.
100%. And so I love that you said that. You are touching on one of my favorite points. So a couple things. One, 100%, which is why I said earlier, I want to beware of saying, full extinction, right? Because you're obviously going to have a lot of small operators that survive, right? And they become that connoisseur brand, right? The craft beer of the industry, right? Whether it's flower, whether it's, a boutique chocolate, whatever the case may be, right? You'll have some folks that are able to command that higher margin, right? Because you're going to need to be able to command that higher price product in order to sustain yourself as a small operator, right? period. Unless you're like widely distributed. When you're competing with everybody else, you won't be able to compete on price there, right? So there's that, right? And I think that you're right. Some folks will be able to capture and become that craft beer. In order to do that, you need to properly develop your brand. You need to properly develop that brand presence as a craft operator, as a connoisseur product, right? A core consumer product, right? And where's now that's an interesting question, right? I mean, in our data, we're still we're about to do some interesting or we're going to be embarking on some interesting research around brand loyalty, but we have some insights around brand awareness, and I can tell you it's very low, right? I mean, it's like barely 20 or 30%, right? Like you have very, very, very little brand awareness, and at best for some brands, right? And so and why, right? Well, what does it take what is the definition of a brand, right? The definition of a brand is, I'm brand or trying to be a brand, and I am looking, the first thing I'm trying to do is figure out who my target consumer is, right? So let's say it's, suburban moms in, rural or in wealthy communities, right? And I'm saying, hey, suburban mom, you have this need, right? Here is a product that can solve this need, right? And look at this, happen to make that exact product that solves your need. And if you go to this store or this store, which is, very close to your home, right, within a 1 mile radius, you will find my product there. And when you buy my product and you consume my product, it will deliver on the exact experience that I promised it will deliver. And then when you go back to that same shop, you will find that same exact product and it will deliver that same exact experience again. And that is how you and I will develop a relationship, right? There are many steps that it takes to get that, right? I listed all those steps. There's a lot of things you have to get right? To be able to achieve that. For starters, you have to just be able to get supply to market on a consistent basis. It is amazing how many folks struggle with that, right? That alone. And obviously there's a lot of challenges in it. So I'm not saying amazing with like, I'm not saying it with like, again, what's the word I'm looking for? Like dismissing them. I'm saying that there are just a lot of factors that go into getting that right? I mean, you have to, there are, which is where I say, I'm cautious using the word overregulation, but very restrictive or stringent regulations make it challenging, right? I mean, you've got to go through so many steps in the supply chain to be compliant, you've got to go through so many steps in the supply chain period, but you also have to maintain compliance along each and every one of those steps. It's very challenging, right? And so just being able to consistently deliver supply at scale, right, on a consistent and reliable basis, right? Make sure it passes testing, make sure it is consistently distributed, right? That's another challenge is that product going to make it time and time again, consistently to those shelves, right? And so again, many steps that need to go right. And then of course you have to be able to produce consistent, reliable product that produces the same effect time and time again. We're still learning, right, that every person responds differently to certain products, certain cannabinoid profiles, certain terpene profiles. That's another challenge this industry has to overcome, right? How do you create consistent products that do the same exact thing every single time for most folks, right? Like I generally know if I drink a glass of wine, what that'll do versus 5, or a shot of vodka versus 6, you know what I mean? And we are still learning that in cannabis, right? We're still learning if that one shot of vodka affects us all the same way, right?
Right. And also the plant has variable genetics, right? So plant may not be identical. It's a plant.
Exactly. And so again, there's just a lot of question marks still, right? And then of course, a huge challenge that this industry faces on the marketing, on the communication side, right? On how do you reach my mom? When you have such limitations, handcuffs when it comes to advertising, right? Whether it be billboard or radio ads, apparently you can do those, right? And I know billboards, I didn't know that radio you could. I think it's still kind of a question mark, but you can produce, ads in whatever you call it, communities or regions or zip codes that have over 71%, I think, of population over 21, right? But yeah, aside from that, it's not like you can do like mass TV ads, print ads aren't easy. I did see incidentally at my mom's house, right? Again, talking about that that target consumer. I saw MedMen and Dosist ads in a lifestyle magazine. My mom is an Orange County suburban, Jewish lady. So I thought that was really interesting, right? Seeing that spill over into a non-endemic cannabis magazine, right? Non-cannabis endemic magazine. But yeah, other than that, they're very restricted, right? I mean, you don't have mass media advertising options. The CBS, Super Bowl acreage ad got shut down and rejected, right? So until you see, I think it's going to be really hard. And of course, the fact that it's hard to have a national presence, right? Like you still have, every state has a separate brand landscape at this point in time, for the most part. You're starting to see some crossover as brands from other states or from California, right, are expanding nationally with cross-state licensing agreements, right? Or getting their own licenses, right? And so that's where you're seeing a lot of this MSO activity pick up, right? Is sort of buying up individual licenses in states and then launching, a national brand, right? And I think that once you start seeing more of that activity take place, I think that you're going to see more consumers developing relationships with brands, right? But right now, especially among the new consumer or the acceptor, the consumer that's the acceptor is what we've trademarked, folks that don't currently consume but are open to it. Right. That's your low hanging fruit. That's my mom. Right. And all of her friends. That's, the untapped target market. Especially when those folks, right, are still walking in the dispensary, the acceptors and the new consumers, they're walking into the dispensary and they're not asking necessarily for a specific brand. They're not saying, hey, I heard this, I heard that, or, they're still saying, what the hell is the difference between wine and beer?
Right. Yeah. Hit me. Give something to me.
Exactly. Like they're like, tell me, but the thing is, these folks have disposable income, right? Like I took my mom in a dispensary in Santa Ana. She spent $360. Like it was nothing.
Right.
Like all these things that will help and benefit me. I want them all.
I was going to say, aside from, the lifestyle perspective, they have a variety of conditions that they're taking lots of pharmaceuticals for. And hopefully, their consumption of cannabis would help ease up on some of the other things that are taking for pain and chronic illnesses.
Exactly. Pain, insomnia, menopause, right? I mean, there's so much. Like my mom's like, just tell me when the weight loss weed comes out. Okay. She's like, that's all I care about. Do
you think that exists? I mean, you hear about it, but do you think that's really real, or is that a unicorn?
Well, we'll see. I don't think it's a unicorn, right? I mean, like when I became a heavy cannabis consumer, I mean, granted, it aligned with me not drinking as much, and I lost 30 pounds. So
wow.
I don't, and I wasn't even like a big person, right? But
wow.
But I mean, and there's a lot of research out there that shows that chronic cannabis consumers have low like BMI and low waist circumference and all that, right? So, and we know, right, that cannabis regulates the right? I mean, it activates the endocannabinoid system, which primarily serves as like a traffic control system for the body, right? A regulator. And so it holds, or it stands to reason, right, that it has regulatory effects on our metabolism, right?
Absolutely.
And brings you to your optimal health. I mean, I don't, I could also just be speculating, right? I mean, but again, this is where I do like to remind people I have a background in biochemistry. So when I talk about this, it's not fully out of my ass, right?
Right.
Only partially, but I do. That was a joke, obviously. I hope. I think I speak. I think I'm pretty confident in what I know and what I don't know, or at least I try to make that clear. But nonetheless, right? There is research showing or indicating that THCV is affiliated with weight loss or appetite suppression. And there are a lot of folks a few folks out there, a few geneticists or genomic engineers. One of the companies I advise actually has isolated a high THCV strain, right? And they sell their cuts to cultivators to produce on a mass scale, right? And then they use that for, depending on whatever it is, but they can extract, right? Then high THCV strain and use that THCV in specific, type of consumable products, right? That are marketed as weight loss. Now it's hard, of course. We have to be careful in this space with how we market products, right? Making certain medical claims. However, you do have already a few products on the market that are THCV heavy, like the Level sublingual strips, right? As well as there is someone else that's doing a high THCV product. I can't think of it off the top of my head, but yeah, I think you're going to see continued evolution along that. Right now, of course, one of the advantages of federal legalization of sorts in due time is that we will expand our research significantly, right? So, you have a lot of research happening in Israel, right? You have a lot of research happening in Spain and Germany, there is, sort of individualized research taking place at UCs. It's a little more challenging, right? Because, they have to abide by UC, research protocols around cannabis, meaning they have to ensure that they don't get charged with aiding and abetting as research institutions if they are using a federally illicit plant to do research. So it's not easy for the universities, right? But they have ways that they're doing it. But until we have full-scale research taking place, right, uncuffed, I don't know if unfettered is the right word here, but just unencumbered research taking place on a mass scale, I think we are going to learn so much more, right? I mean, we've already learned enough, and we are, in my opinion, just at the tip of the iceberg, right, when it comes to our medical knowledge and research on this plant. And so I'm really looking forward to seeing what else comes out of that. And I did have a point that I wanted to make to sort of wrap up a point from before, but if I think about it, I'll tell you.
Okay, sounds good. Well,
yeah, I do remember. And so just one thing I do want to point out, right, and that sort of like brings up a few of the things we've discussed, right, is we'd focused a lot on Canada being, a capital and first mover like market, right? We focused on California, right, being the sort of brand and community and culture leader of cannabis, right? And then Israel will sort of serve that third global trifecta, right, where we've got Canada being the capital, California being the culture, and Israel being the research, right, of cannabis. I think that's where, and I've heard other people say this too, but I do think that that's what we're going to, at least 5 years from now, see this industry as, right? Or already, really.
That's great. Now, obviously you have a lot of experience with cannabis and have a biochemistry background. There's a question that comes up a lot, and since you're female, and I know this question has been posed to you many, many times probably, what are your thoughts on consumption of THC while pregnant or breastfeeding? Because no one that I know can give me a straight answer, and I figured, I'm like, she might have a good answer.
Okay. As I am currently pregnant, I will not answer about myself. I plead the fifth. But I only because we are still, I've heard many, many horror stories, right? I'm not saying I do or I don't. I'm just not answering.
Sure.
But I have heard many stories of Child Protective Services showing up at mothers. After I've had friends that have had horrifying births or C-sections and traumatic scenarios with the baby, and then minutes later, they have Child Protective Services knocking on their door in the hospital, right? Because they tested positive or reported, yes, that they consumed cannabis for morning sickness or whatever the case was, right?
Wow.
So, first of all, I think that's horrifying because there is a ridiculous amount of material that we are putting into our bodies on a regular basis, even while pregnant, that, it's okay for you to have a glass of wine at night and Child Protective Services is going to show up at your door, right? What about all the high fructose corn syrup and the fast food and the preservatives and the benzenes that we're inhaling from seemingly every plastic product around us, right? I think that it's just kind of insane to, single out, right? Obviously the fact is, we all know, we don't need to get into why the prohibition of cannabis began and the political interests and the pharmaceutical interests, right? The lobbying and corporate interests that are all benefiting from or have benefited from its prohibition, right? We don't need to get into that. Obviously there's the racial, but that's when I meant political, there's a lot that went into it.
Mm-hmm.
But we do know that, there is research, right? I mean, people keep saying there's no research on cannabis and pregnancy. There's no research on cannabis and pregnancy, but we know we do. I mean, there's there was a study done. I mean, one of them, first of all, women have been consuming cannabis and pregnancy for millennia, and we know that too, right? It is talked about in books and traditional research books, and also, there are a lot of women that do consume it for morning sickness, and it is, one of the most effective methods of treating morning sickness, right? You have Zofran, you have all these other harsh medications that, they approved Zofran, and then a few years later found out that it causes birth defects, and yet they are still prescribing that to women, right? And yet here, this plant, right, that we can grow in our backyard, have been consuming for millennia, we really still till this day do not have any clear evidence on not just long-term health effects for us humans, right? There's some research on the developing brain, right? The teenage brain, or, growing brain, right? And even that is questionable research and has been contradicted many times. But the biggest study there was, and there have been studies here and there, a lot of the research on pregnancy and breastfeeding is very alarmist, right? But when you actually look into it, they're kind of reporting potential results in lower birth rate, right? And even that is even that is questionable, right? I mean, one of the challenges, again, is because everyone is so afraid of child protective services showing up at their door, is there's a lot of women that had children with low birth rate that did not report that they were consuming cannabis, right? And they're all being factored, and vice, or a lot of women that had children of normal birth weight, that did not report that consume cannabis, but those are getting factored into the other camp, right? They're getting factored into the pool of women that didn't consume, because the women are, so you're already looking at biased, incorrect reporting, right? Your sample is off, right? But in addition to that, it's a skewed sample, right? But in addition to that, the one true longitudinal study that has taken place is a study in Jamaica, by a woman named Melanie Dreher, Dreher, I believe. And that study, I'm tempted to say, took place in the 90s in a community of actually a spliff smoking community. So these women mixed tobacco into their cannabis, right? And it is common for women in that community to consume spliffs while pregnant. And this study she conducted right across a subsection of these women, obviously with control, and incidentally noticed that not just were the birth measures or the baby's developmental measures entirely on point, but it was a longitudinal study. So I believe she came back in increments after the fact. I know that she came back and measured, progress 5 years down the line, I believe a decade down the line, potentially more, and incidentally saw that the children of the mothers that consumed spliffs during pregnancy actually outperformed and were of better health than the children of those that didn't. And so, that again, it's just so hard to know, right? A, because reporting is off, right? And B, because it's not controlled in a lab, right? We're not, the folks that are doing this research, it's usually outpatient research, right? They're not providing the consumers with the cannabis because that would be illegal for them to do, right? These universities or research institutes, right? And so usually consumers are acquiring it on their own and just being asked about their consumption habits. So there's a lot of question marks there, right? Like, are the consumers accurately reporting? Are they reporting what else they do? I mean, it's maybe they're also taking prescription meds for their depression. Maybe they're taking, who knows, right? And so maybe they're consuming other drugs. Maybe they're consuming cigarettes and copious amounts of alcohol, right? So the controls aren't there, right, for a lot of these studies. And so I just think that we are very far behind our understanding of cannabis and, well, in general, pregnancy and a lot of other things, right? Pregnancy is still a bit unknown on many, many levels. There's still a lot of question marks on what the hell actually takes place down there, right? In there. But I will tell you, right, what we do know is that breast milk has a significant amount of naturally occurring cannabinoids. Tea has naturally occurring cannabinoids, right? These are products. These are, products that historically have been known to cause soothing, calming, healing effects, right? There's nothing like a cup of tea at the end of the day, right? And when a baby, consumes the milk, right, the breast milk, that it tends to soothe them, right, to calm them down, to put them to sleep, but it also stimulates appetite, right? What does that sound like? Cannabis, right?
Sure.
Cannabis, it does just that, right? It helps you, people call it the milk drunk. Well, I think it's more of a milk high, right? It stimulates the baby, helps the baby sleep, helps the baby calm down. Like, what a shocking concept, right? And I think, that I'll leave you with two other sort of, in my opinion, biological proof factors that that we're supposed to consume cannabis. One is the fact that we have an endocannabinoid system, right? And not just an endocannabinoid system. We have endocannabinoid receptors in every single cell in our body except for our brainstem, right? Now, why is that interesting? Because the brainstem controls your breathing and your heart rate, right? So that's why it's literally impossible to overdose on cannabis, because you can't shut down your breathing and your heart rate. There are no cannabinoid receptors, or at least very, very minimal. Now, where that is a challenge is if you do have cancer or some sort of, if you have a cancer in the brainstem, you're shit out of luck, right? But in terms of cannabis being able to help there, right? But it is still really interesting to me that we have a built-in fail-safe, right? We literally have a built-in fail-safe in our bodies for this plant. You cannot consume too much of it. Additionally, you think about most toxins that your body consumes, right? Your liver or your kidneys or whatever it is that's flushing them out. I mean, they're working in overdrive to get that shit out of your system in like 24 hours, right? And there were 48 hours, right? Your body generally doesn't want to keep those materials, but cannabis we store for weeks in our fat cells, right? Months even. Why is that, right? Why do we have fat cells? So we have fat cells for emergency storage, right? I mean, if you're ever in a situation where, we're in a drought or in a famine, our bodies then begin to break down those fat cells for ATP, for energy, right? Well, what else do we need? What else is a biological necessity? Medicine, cannabinoids. Maybe that's why we store them in our fat cells.
Wow.
They're reserved. Anyway, that's I'll leave you there with that science.
I think that was a fascinating conversation, and I love the conclusions that you drew from some of the research. It's been an engaging conversation. Thank you so much for jumping on, and congratulations on the baby. And we appreciate all your time and insight.
Thank you very much. This was fun. Yeah, I appreciate it as well.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
We'll chat soon. Bye.
Okay.